Hi, this is Paul. I know there's a ton of videos that happened while I was in Italy, but one of the ones I listened to early on, and I thought there were some important things in, was this dissident dialogues hosted by Freddie Sayers with Alex O'Connor and John Vervaeke. Now, Alex O'Connor has really been on, well, he's been putting out a lot of really good stuff. And in his Peugeot conversation, I thought Jonathan was right that Alex right now is a guy who's been one of the best conversation partners around many of these, at least from the skeptical chair. And this was no exception. I want to talk. I want to talk. Well, let's just jump into it.
Alex O'Connor, is there a meaning crisis?
I want to say yes. I want to say a misleading yes, because I think that people often I think the title of this panel is Finding Meaning in a Secular Age. I'm not sure that the meaning crisis that we're in is strictly due to or related to secularism in particular. I think that if there is a meaning crisis, it can be described as the human condition. If you look at what people say on some self-help YouTube video about Albert Camus, talking about going into work, coming home, tide comes in, tide goes out, sun up, sun down, and none of it means anything. Sure, you can find that there, but you can also find it in the book of Ecclesiastes. This isn't a new thing. And so when people talk about the meaning crisis and feel a bit pessimistic about the fact that, you're struggling to find a reason to be and a reason to act, the first thing that I'd like to point out is that this isn't some modern phenomenon. It's exacerbated by new specific modern phenomena, social media, phone addiction, this kind of stuff. But the idea of struggling to find meaning is no new problem.
Okay, so on one hand, that's correct. You can find a meaning crisis of sorts in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, we should always, even though we cannot avoid sort of abstract categoricals like the human condition, even though there's enormous variety even in one individual's life in terms of the human condition, I think it's helpful to note that I've made the point before, I've made the point earlier, that I bump into suicide as an existential threat more often in North America than I did, let's say, working with poor Haitians in the Dominican Republic. Why? Because there is an affordance of meaning that happens just in the struggle to survive. And in that sense, in the human condition, no. If you're thinking, well, what is the human condition, especially if you're sort of a naturalist? There's a question of definition here too. And again, one of the best videos on the meaning crisis was a very early video with John Vervaeke and Christopher Mastropietro. They didn't really sort of redo it. The sound was pretty rocky on that, but it was on the symptomology of the meaning crisis. We're looking at people who have, at a level unprecedented in human history and at a scale unprecedented in human history, have their material wants secured. And it's at that level that then they are given to much more existential questions and even crises that provoke this deeper question of a meaning crisis. And so when John and Christopher Mastropietro talk about higher levels of suicide, meaninglessness, escapism, it basically goes to Dostoevsky's point in Life in the Underground that if you give a human being everything that they need physically, they will destroy what they have out of spite, out of boredom. The premise that human beings are in some ways simply creatures that can be satisfied by having our basic human needs satiated is continually proven untrue. Now, of course, the author of Ecclesiastes, That gets into a big exegetical point, but the author of Ecclesiastes is portrayed as a great king who has everything that everyone could ever want. And so, in some ways, that adds to the element of affluence as a primary cause for the meaning crisis. Now, I worked on Mussolini a little bit in my sermon, especially the final draft that happened at Living Stones that you can find on the church channel. But I'm reading through, history of the 20th century, and I've been reading in the Renaissance period as well. Once you get a degree of affluence, once you get to a degree of wealth, once you make, in a sense, privation an optional thing in your life, in other words, chosen privation, then suddenly questions of the meaning crisis arise, because you're asking bigger philosophical questions. So, on one hand, I think Alex O'Connor is correct that these are questions that human beings have been asking throughout recorded civilization. On the other hand, in our day of affluence, we have a particular aspect of the meaning crisis that is deeper, and I think that's where John Vervaeke is correct.
So you're an atheist.
Yes.
A proud atheist.
A reluctant atheist.
Where do you get your meaning?
You just a reluctant atheist. I mean, Freddie said to me, like, pause the conversation, Freddie. Ask him to follow up on that reluctant atheism. Now, in other conversations, he has commented that I've heard whispers of he would like to believe. And this, again, is not something that is uncommon among deconstructed people. I talked to Jared, the nihilistic atheist, a number of weeks ago, who was making these videos on visiting church. And what I hear from him is very common, in that what his religious worldview afforded him was a great deal of joy and satisfaction and peace, and he, for a variety of reasons, found it untenable. And I think that is much more the context of the meaning crisis that we're dealing with, let's say, in this little corner, and that John Vervaeke is dealing with in his work.
Meaning from?
Well, I was trying to think about what meaning actually means, and generally when talking about it, I try to give some clever-sounding academic definition. But I was reading Blaise Pascal's Pensées, the Thoughts, this marvelous volume, and I don't think it was ever supposed to be published. But in the first part, Man Without God, he talks about the concept of boredom. There's this wonderful passage on the concept of boredom. And he says, it's where you get this famous quote that all of man's troubles spring from his inability to sit alone in a room in silence. And he imagines somebody...
Okay, even right there, you can get a sense of the modern predicament, because in many periods in history, education was basically leisure. To be able to sit alone in a room in silence affords a certain level of support, let's say.
Who tries to pass their boredom by gambling. Every day he goes and places a stake in the hopes that he'll win some money. And this is how he stops himself from being bored. And Pascal says, well, give this man all of the money that he could have won in the gambling game on the condition that he can't play anymore. And you'll make him unhappy because there's no thrill in it, there's no excitement. Okay, so he doesn't just want to win the money, he wants to play the game. Okay, says Pascal, allow him to play the game, but he's guaranteed not to win the money. You're also going to make him upset. Okay, so what is it then? You need something like not having the thing desired, along with the illusion that once you achieve the thing that's desired, it's going to make you happy.
Now, illusion, yes, especially if you look at, let's say, lottery winners, because after you've won the lottery a certain number of years later, you basically default back to your happiness quotient. Again, before any of this started, Jonathan Haidt's book, The Happiness Hypothesis, really a fine book.
But because having the thing on its own isn't actually going to make you happy, you also need to not have it. So meaning has to be something like that slightly self-deceptive position of identifying happiness in something you don't have, believing that you can achieve it, and then constantly not achieve it, right? Because it used to be the case that the things that, I mean, with the sort of centers of meaning, the self-help stuff that I was mentioning a moment ago, they say, you know, seek discomfort, cold showers, and go to the gym and eat healthily and this kind of thing. And it's because, you know, it used to be that when you wake up, it was a gamble. You don't know if you're going to have a shelter over your head. You don't know if you're going to have food to eat. Every single day, the thing resets. Now, you've got the money without the game. You've got the food, you've got the shelter, you're fine. So what people are doing is they're seeking out the game without the prize. This is why religion does it so well, because religion is the definition of something which you don't have now, and for your entire life will not have, and yet believe that you can have, and think that that thing is desirable. That must be the thing that religion serves. So
I think that's a terrific answer. I think that's a terrific answer. Because it makes perfect sense. It's something we can sort of relate to. It's something that you can look at whole varieties of religions and say, yeah, that works. Now if you look at the Peugeot-Boghossian conversation, Peter wants to sort of, okay, well, let's settle on truth claims. And what's helpful here is to ask questions of, okay, the functionality of religion, which is a very big part of the conversations today, the functionality of religions. And you can look at what Alex O'Connor said and say, hey, lots of different religions will foot the bill to resolve your meaning crisis to a degree. The thing is that religion is going to have to at least be plausible. So when you look at people, let's say, who have left the faith or deconstructed their faith, it's often because for one reason or another, their religion has become implausible. And so they can no longer hold it. And so they are then sad and depressed. And, you know, like Jared, you know, he's a nihilism by profession, but he doesn't want to be a nihilist. And he doesn't want to act like a nihilist. But that's sort of the worldview that has him captured, and he wishes that instead he lived even in an implausible world. And I think that has a lot, you can see that with Ayaan Hirsi Ali's. She was fighting to survive. Now, she was fighting to survive against nihilism. And again, I think she's right. She didn't use these words, but I use these words describing what she was saying, that she's found atheism to be something like AIDS. What it does is new atheism sort of destroyed the worldviews that were affording people, those worldviews were in some ways their immune system, and new atheism kind of comes in and destroys that, and it leaves them vulnerable to, you know, all sorts of the self-deception that John Vervaeke talks about.
Agony. And that my experience is my awakening, spiritual awakening, was preceded by suffering, depression, just really mental agony. And that's unfortunately what led me to my spiritual awakening. But maybe what led me to the mental depression was the shutting off of spirituality and, you know, the declaration that I'm an atheist, I can do all things by myself. Maybe that's, I mean, I don't know, you can say, was it the egg or the chicken that came first?
Yeah.
But right now, I think that for me, it's the mental suffering that took me to a place of humility and this spiritual awakening. And after I've experienced it, and I'm still experiencing it, it is an awareness. My life is changed, it's transformed. I can only share that. I can't say, you know, some people have all sorts of wonderful, magnificent things that they talk about, lights and dreams and visions, and I didn't have any of that. I don't think I would be credible if I said any of that, because I didn't. But what goes on, you know, I had these thoughts these incessant, constant thoughts. My head was constantly full of these ideas, worries. I was terrified of things. And tried to treat that with medicine, with consulting therapists and psychiatrists, with alcohol, and none of it worked. And simple, basic prayer and surrender worked. And so I pray every day. I pray in the morning and I pray at night. And I'm at peace, and those awful thoughts are gone. My head is clear, I'm more productive, I'm a better person. That for me is all the evidence I need.
Now, I do want to very much come back to this Jonathan Pageau and Peter Boghossian conversation, because there's a lot in there to talk about, especially the whole truth claim thing. But again, part of what Jonathan keeps pointing Peter to is, again, participation. And you heard that in Ayaan Hirsi Ali. This is something, how does she get through? She gets through with prayer. She participates in a much larger story. And it's that participation within a worldview that the meaning has. But now that's, again, there needs to be a plausibility structure. And for different people, their plausibility structures are going to be different. And for someone, how can I say this? For Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for many people, their plausibility structure is not simply a mental projection or a purely theoretical thing. So I was in Italy and I did like zero preparation for Italian before I went there. Certain members of my family were doing Duolingo to try and learn Italian. I got there and was like, oh crap, man. Being in a country where you don't speak the language is always a little bit of a pain, because you're sort of left to sort of stay on this certain level. And I always find that level frustrating there with the tourists. And part of it was I went to a place like Italy and it was like, I'd love to spend 6 months here, at least get a start at getting to know the language so you can kind of get below the surface of the country and get to know some real Italians and get to know their ideas and their perspectives. And of course, having been a foreign missionary, you can go to the Dominican Republic and just go and see the nice beaches and go to the tourist areas, but it's much more fun to actually get to know people there and their perspectives and get a sense of the country and the culture and all of that. So then I was looking at some, I thought, well, I noticed that I could understand a fair amount of spoken Italian in context, basically because of its similarity to Spanish. I could sort of piece together something of what some people were saying, because even though written-wise it looked quite different, the sounds were quite a bit more similar. So then I was looking at some YouTubes that had just much more Italian, basic Italian, to sort of train my ears a little bit to kind of get a better sense for the language. I never really got a sense to speak the language, but one of the videos I came across was someone making the point that if you really want to learn a language, what you have to do is sort of engage within the language. And he was dead on right. There was this program that I went to before I was a foreign missionary, and it was a language learning program, and basically the person said, if you want to learn a language, you got to make 1 million mistakes, so you might as well get going. And my wife, who had a degree in Spanish when she went to the Dominican Republic, and me, who had some high school and college Spanish, but not much more, I just dove in and started butchering the language. And my wife was sort of horrified at this. She's like, you're really butchering the language. And said, the dude said you got to make 1 million mistakes, and I'm getting started. And it's that level of participation, and we actually are the plausibility structures that we actually engage the world with are far less theoretical. They are quite communal, but they're not really theoretical. So Ayaan Hirsi Ali, we're always walking around checking our plausibility structures. Those mechanisms within us are always checking, always recalibrating, always redefining. And she got to a point of a crisis where she needed a transformation, and so then she grabbed onto something, and she described that in the one Unheard interview where she's talking to her therapist.
A lot of people were also questioning what appeared to be more of a sort of practical way of making your faith decisions. That was very discussed. I mean, the article has been read many hundreds of thousands of times already since Friday, and no doubt will continue to be. But I did notice that as a common response, which is, it felt like a justification or a discussion of Christianity as a mechanism to resist cultural collapse, almost. And there was not so much of a personal journey, not so much about your own faith. Is there anything that you would expand on there?
So the reason why first of all, you have, a limit on the number of words that you want to publish on her. And I'm expanding this into a book. But yes, there's a very personal story. I don't know to what extent it's useful, but on a very personal level, I went through a period of crisis, very personal crisis of fear, anxiety, depression. I went to the best therapists money can pay. I think they gave me an explanation of some of the things that I was struggling with, but I continued to have this big spiritual hole or need, as you call it. I tried to self-medicate. I tried to sedate myself. I drank enough alcohol you could use to sterilize a hospital. It would not, nothing helped. I continued to read, books on psychiatry and the brain, and none of that helped. All of that explained a small piece of the puzzle, but there was still something that I was missing. And then I think it was one therapist who said to me early this year, I think, Ayan, you're spiritually bankrupt. And at that point, I was in a place where I had sort of given up hope. I was in this place of darkness, and I thought, well, what the hell? I'm going to open myself to that and see, ask her, what are you talking about?
See, and that's, she's continuing to work her plausibility structure. Sunday I talked about a little bit about Alex O'Connor, and it's an interesting thing when he talks about Gnosticism with Jonathan Peugeot and Bart Ehrman, that C.S. Lewis's observation that, okay, Alex O'Connor, why can you imagine a better world? So you complain about the God that you find setting up the story of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Why can you imagine a better world? It would sort of like be imagining a world in which the math works better than it does in this world. And you would say, well, how could the math work better in another world than this world? You say, it's really it doesn't make any sense, such an aspiration, that the math would work better. But we imagine life would be better. And maybe we imagine life would be better because sometimes we get a B instead of an A on a paper, or we get a paycheck that has this much, and we think life would be better if we had this much. But on a global scale, and so we're always sort of recalibrating our plausibility structures. And she found herself in a place where my plausibility structure and the way I see the world is not working. I think, again, she was having a meaning crisis. She's having a meaning crisis exactly the way that John Vervaeke describes meaning crises. And so she got to a point where it's like, okay, I'm going to radically adjust a variable. I'm going to take new atheism. I'm going to push it aside, at least as an attempt, and I'm going to try something else, and I'm going to see if life works better. I'm going to try a new math and see if this new math actually affords better answers than the old math.
And we started talking about faith and a belief in God, and I explained to her that the God I grew up with was a horror show. He created you to punish you and frightened you, and as a girl and as a woman, you're just a piece of trash. And so I said to her, I explained to her why I didn't believe in God, and more than that, why I actually hated God. And then she asked me to design my own God. And she said, if you had the power to, attribute a higher power, if you had the power to make your own God, what would you do? And as I was going on, I thought, yeah, right. That's actually a description of Jesus Christ and Christianity at its best. And so instead of inventing yet another new God, I started diving into that story. And so far, my husband and I went about, both of us saying we're atheists, and now I like this story. I explore it, and the more I look at it, the more, I don't want to say I'm fulfilled, but I feel I no longer have this need, this void, I have to say, and I feel like I'm going somewhere. There are standards that I have to live by that are quite high, and that's daunting. But these are standards that I'd rather aspire to and fail. Maybe the only human being who nearly achieved that was the late Queen Elizabeth. But trying to emulate her is this daily practice of hardship.
Well, she never did interviews, so that was
And again, now, having heard that, go back and listen to what Alex O'Connor figures out from Blaise Pascal again.
In the hopes that he'll win some money. And this is how he stops himself from being bored. Talk, and generally when talking about it, I try to give some clever-sounding academic definition, but I was reading Blaise Pascal's Pensées, the Thoughts, this marvelous volume, and I don't think it was ever supposed to be published, but in the first part, Man Without God, he talks about the concept of boredom. There's this wonderful passage on the concept of boredom, and he says, it's where you get this famous quote that all of man's troubles spring from his inability to sit alone in a room in silence. And he imagines somebody who tries to pass their boredom by gambling. Every day he goes and places a stake in the hopes that he'll win some money. And this is how he stops himself from being bored. And Pascal says, well, give this man all of the money that he could have won in the gambling game on the condition that he can't play anymore. And you'll make him unhappy because there's no thrill in it, there's no excitement. Okay, so he doesn't just want to win the money, he wants to play the game. Okay, says Pascal, allow him to play the game, but he's guaranteed not to win the money. You're also going to make him upset. Okay, so what is it then? You need something like not having the thing desired, along with the illusion that once you achieve the thing that's desired, it's going to make you happy. But because having the thing on its own isn't actually going to make you happy, you also need to not have it. So meaning has to be something like that slightly self-deceptive position of identifying happiness in something you don't have, believing that you can achieve it, and then constantly not achieve it, right? Because it used to be the case that the things that, with the sort of centers of meaning, the self-help stuff that I was mentioning a moment ago, they say, seek discomfort, cold showers, and go to the gym and eat healthily and this kind of thing. And it's
See, she already had discomfort. And what she's finding as she's recalibrating is that, are you completely happy now? Have you achieved it? Is there a high standard? Yeah, there is a high standard. But I do believe it is achievable. Why do you believe it's achievable? Well, Queen Elizabeth seemed to have it. And so, obviously there's sort of the religious, there's the further out one, but there's this one that's closer. And when he talks here about cold showers, I think about the transition, let's say, from religious monasticism to this new betterment maxing monasticism that you see in men and women in the internet. Now John Vervaeke's going to get into here the whole practices thing.
And go to the gym and eat healthily and this kind of thing. And it's because, it used to be that when you wake up, it was a gamble. You don't know if you're going to have a shelter over your head. You don't know if you're going to have food to eat every single day. The thing resets. Now, you've got the money without the game. You've got the food, you've got the shelter, you're fine. So what people are doing is they're seeking out the game without the prize.
Except, of course, it isn't just the survival game. And that's where Alex is both right, that this is a perennial issue. But it's... So I'm reading all these books about the Pope and Mussolini right now in the Second World War, the popes and Mussolini in the Second World War. And I'm thinking about how Jordan Peterson says to Joe Rogan, and this is a theme that he was going through a while ago, mental health isn't between your ears. Mental health is between each other. And this thing sort of scales all the way up. And so in that sense, Peter Boghossian's comment about truth claims isn't completely irrelevant, but what happens with, as John Vervaeke says, propositional tyranny, is that this certain aspect of truth claims gets oversold culturally so that it's weighted too heavily and the whole system is distorted. And that is sort of where Ayaan Hirsi Ali found herself.
This is why religion does it so well, because religion is the definition of something which you don't have now and for your entire life will not have, and yet believe that you can have and think that that thing is desirable. That must be the thing that religion serves. So, look, I was really happy to be invited and speak here, and I think it's wonderful, but when somebody asks me where do I find my meaning, I'm like, I'm as much in this struggle as anybody else. There's nothing that I can do.
But he is finding his meaning in the struggle. And so in many ways, he's finding his meaning. And this has been one of the big things that we've seen in Alex O'Connor and how he's participated in this space. He's finding this meaning in the religious struggle. and he's clearly enjoying it, and he's doing very well. So
to help you find it, except for firstly helping to try and recognize what it is that we're actually looking for. And I think it's maybe something like that.
John, do you recognize that struggle, that description, or do you have a bit more of a sort of purposeful view of it?
Well, no, I mean, I respect Alex, what he's saying, and I think there's important truths in it. I would say initially, I agree with Alex, there's a perennial problem of meaning, Ecclesiastes or books of the same ilk. And I think this has to do with the fact that we are perennially prone to despair because the very processes that make
Alex O'Connor will often mention Tolstoy's Confessions, which is an awesome little book. But again, Tolstoy at this point had achieved everything he had. It's very much an Ecclesiastes moment and situation.
Make us intelligently adaptive, also make us perpetually susceptible to self-deception. And we can get bound up and cut off and disconnected from ourselves and other people. So I think there's definitely a perennial aspect, cross-cultural, cross-historical aspect to it. I think what's specific about what I call the meaning crisis is that those perennial problems usually have had perennial solutions. There have been, and the solutions are not what we call belief systems. They are systems, or better, make it more sort of dynamic, ecologies of practices, ways of transforming consciousness, cognition, character, community, that give people a sense that they're ameliorating this self-deception and enhancing their connectedness to themselves, to other people, to the world. And those ecologies of practices have been housed in various things, or homed is better. They've been homed in religions, but they've also been homed in these things that sort of hang on the border between philosophy and religion, like Buddhism and Taoism, and maybe Stoicism. And so what seems to be the case, though, is we don't have a socially recognized, legitimated home outside of the religions for people who want to ameliorate their foolishness, who want to enhance their connectedness. If you'll allow me a little bit highfalutin word. And
I think so this gets into the civilizational aspect. So again, I've been now devouring the follow-up book to The Pope and Mussolini, which is The Pope at War, which is Pius XII. And part of what's happening in our culture right now, again, is pluralism. Okay, we've got I listen. I was in our estuary group on Sunday morning, and even among churched people, but there's some people there that don't go to church in our estuary group, pluralism just sort of hangs over us. And it's especially true in America, where it is a deeply pluralistic place, and especially in a place like California. And of course, pluralism has been known in other places in the world. But when I look at what the popes were struggling with in Italy, and I never sort of had as much of a sense until reading these books of just how Italian the Roman Catholic Church was in the 20th century and before, because of course the Pope ruled over these papal states. And one of the interesting back and forths between, let's say, Mussolini and the popes, when Mussolini was starting to introduce the anti-Semitic legislation, the Pope and Hitler kept countering, or Mussolini and Hitler kept countering the Pope by saying, but in your papal states you had anti-Semitic legislation. The Jews had to wear certain things that marked them off, and they couldn't do some things and they could do other things. And you used to practice this, now you're practicing. But again, the popes would say, yeah, but people could stop becoming a Jew and start becoming a Christian. And so you see this category errors, or this, not error, but this category situation that's going on in that. So part of what happens, I think, one of the things that we've paid not enough attention to in our conversations about the meaning crisis is, of course, pluralism, and the way that pluralism has deeply disrupted the siloed religious communities, because all of this has to do not only with our abstract thoughts about worldview and things like that, but the embodied interactive ways in which we actually live in and work with our worldview on an ongoing basis.
Who want to cultivate wisdom. And because of that, and that has to do with some very important historical factors.
And of course, wisdom, you can look at Chokmah, the wisdom literature, Ecclesiastes, we've already mentioned a number of times, but the book of Proverbs, all of that too is very much an embodied, participatory, interactive, always perpetually calibrating interchange with other human beings, with the natural world, and with the spiritual world. I'll use that word. That we're always working these puzzles, including Alex O'Connor. And again, I think the shape of the conversations that he's having and the reasons that he's having them is he is in many ways a seeker. He started out this conversation by saying a reluctant atheist. And, where we are at right now is people who are increasingly desiring to play in a spiritual world. This is the re-enchantment theme. I've only read the first chapter of Dreer's new book yet. He sent me an advanced copy, and again, I get distracted and obsessed with other things, and so now it's the Pope and the popes and Mussolini and the Second World War. But I will get around to Rod Dreer's book. But it's got to be an interactive game, and that's where the fun is, and that's where the learning is. Again, just like learning a language, you can sit there and do Duolingo and listen, but the real interaction is going to a country and not just learning, let's say, the language in the book, but learning the slang. It's always hilarious when people come and say learn English, or even when I learned Spanish, when you're just sort of learning it on the street, you learn all the naughty words early, because that's the words that you hear people say. But again, it's an interactive, and really that's where we see the meaning happening.
But do you think it's new, though? I mean, Alex was saying it's been around forever. Just a mile away, we have the Columbia campus. It has nothing to do with this conversation in a way, but the intensity of the political disagreement, the sense that people are fundamentally unreconciled. Do you think that is just another manifestation of this? Do you think we are in a particularly...
Very, very much. And I think from an anthropological point of view, not a theological point of view, from an anthropological point of view, these are religious events. These are people... Well, I want to do what Alex did. What is it that we're seeking? We're seeking meaning. So in cognitive science and psychology, we try to distinguish between the meaning of life, which is some grand metaphysical claim, and meaning in life. and philosophers like Susan Wolf and others. So what this is that it sort of has a bunch of factors, but one is, does the world make sense to you? Think of all the things you have in a video game and why people want to be in video games. Does the world make sense to you? Is there a story that you can play a part in? And is there a way for you to level up, for you to get better as a person, to enhance your agency? And so it's this fundamental sense of connectedness. And so you can determine meaning in life by asking people 3 questions. What do you want to exist even if you don't? How really real is it? And how much of a difference do you make to it now?
I think those 3 questions are fundamentally another world mythology. Because a world without you in it is a different world than the world you're living in now. And even though it's not as fully formed and well developed and as communally oriented and shared as, let's say, the kingdom of God or heaven or nirvana or whatever religious second world or next world or afterworld. When John says that right there, he's basically, it's another world mythology. You want to make the world, the 3 points that he made. It's after you die, so you're no longer in it, so it's a different world. And it's really real. And it's something that the things you do now impact what that next world is going to be. And I look at that and I say, well, for Christians, functionally, that's heaven or life of the age to come or the new heavens and the new earth, whichever theological language you want to use in that. In secular terms, we use words like the future or the right side of history, blah, 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 those kinds of things. But it's a different world mythology.
These people in these events, they want to connect to something, a cause that's bigger than themselves. And they want it to exist. They think the universe is a better place if this cause is there. They want to they think it's really real. They think these are real events. This is significant, important. This isn't like going to the store and buying milk. And they think they can make a difference by participating in it, committing to it. And so I think it's very much, and the fact, I think it's very much an act about trying to get this connectedness. And the fervor means that it's being driven by, a tinge of anxiety, a tinge of hunger, a tinge even of, potential despair.
I mean, they would say, if they were here right now on this panel, they'd be pretty cross by that suggestion, I think, because they would say there are big problems. These are issues which they're engaging with in a practical way. Alex, do you look at the news? Do you look at stuff happening like in Colombia?
And again, when I'm reading, it's so interesting what happens with, so right now, D-Day hasn't happened. Sicily has not been invaded. The British haven't won the war in North Africa yet. It looks like Hitler's surely going to win this war. They haven't sort of stalled in Stalingrad. We're at that point in the story, in my reading about the story between the popes and Mussolini and Hitler. And, everybody's telling them that, if Hitler wins this war, he's already dismantled the Catholic Church in Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia. He's going to keep doing it. And whereas you've sort of had a degree of agreement with Mussolini, because Mussolini was personally no friend of the church, but he had to do it for political expedient. Once political expediency is no longer there, Mussolini's going to destroy the church as fast as Hitler, perhaps. So again, it's a whole nother world. You're imagining the world of the Third Reich, or the world of fascism. Now, this conversation with Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Glenn Scrivener, I thought was really quite excellent. And now they're basically going to make similar points to what was happening in that video with Vervaeke and O'Connor.
Absorbed the conflict in himself first in order to bring us peace. And I think as we internalize the story, I think then the values come out.
And when you internalize the story and you understand that you can't attain it, yes, that you're only human and that, yes, you keep failing, that it's okay, try again, yes, I think that's even more powerful. Yes. And you keep at it. Yes. So I'll give you an example of, I go to church every Sunday. What occurs in church? You pray and you praise God and you sing the hymns of praise, and there's a collection, the charity aspect of it. Now, some people find that incomprehensible, and to be honest with you, in the beginning, of course, I didn't understand any of it, or very little of it. But now I'm getting more and more of it and finding it very beautiful and peaceful and rewarding. But at the end of the service, we have coffee, we have tea, a few bites here and there, and then you have the community that starts to get together, and that's how you know what's going on in your neighbor's house, what's on with you. They know what's going on in our house.
Her church needs an estuary. I'm just going to say that right now. And if it's in the Bay Area, just give me a call. Say, Paul, my church needs an estuary. Come and help me start one. I'll be there.
We know what's going on with them. And that sense of community, that exercise of doing it on a weekly basis, that gives you, I think, the remedy you are seeking now for all these atomization that's going on.
Yes.
These individuals who are lost in social media, who are broken, and who you really need to bring back or advertise why the church is a better place to go.
So what would you say to people? Because there are so many people, as you say, there are just generation after generation. It used to be grandma that went to church, and now it's maybe great-grandma who went to church. But Ion started going, and Ion found it baffling and bewildering to begin with. And someone is thinking to themselves, I'm not sure what I'll find on a Sunday. I'm not sure I believe any of the mumbo-jumbo of the creeds.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody?
I would say just sit through it. Mm-hmm. The sounds are beautiful. Not all churches are the same. I attended churches that were ranting on about Trump, and I didn't go again. Mm-hmm. So find a church where the vicar or the
pastor or the
pastor, the bishop, is actually true to the teachings of Christianity, not distracted by politics and by the things that are going on around them today. And that's the community. Find a community you want to be a part of, and then participate, become a part of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, I understand. In the beginning, you go and sit in the back and think, "What the heck is going on?" Yeah.
But then, what then happens? I've got a friend, Paul Vanderclay, who's also a YouTuber. He says, if you want to believe something, find a group of people who believe it and join them. Mm-hmm. But there is something about plausibility structures, isn't there? And there's something about communal, embodied, paying attention to something that actually awakens you to something that's already there. Is that been part of your experience?
My experience is my awakening, spiritual awakening, was preceded by suffering, depression, just really mental agony.
And that's where we started. So, yeah, I'll land the plane on this video right now. But, yeah, we will get to Jonathan Pageau and Alex O'Connor, and to Jonathan Pageau and Peter Boghossian, both really good conversations with a bunch of stuff I want to dig into, and I will make more videos about the popes and the Second World War and Benito Mussolini and the relationship between, well, I think, pluralism, religion, and having to live within a shared story. So leave a comment. Let me know what you think.